guys? Welcome back to Kpnit99, the most edifying podcast in the world. And I'm joined here today with Gabriel Hanna. Thank you, Gabe, for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited. It's good. I know you've had a long route going to different places, so it's good to see you.
So before we get started, I'd just like to get to know you a little bit more, who you are, what you're about. So give us a quick little bio.
So I go to St. Mark in Natick, Massachusetts. Everyone just refers to Natick or anything in Massachusetts as Boston, so you could just consider it Boston. I'm finishing my last year in college. I graduate this upcoming Friday in neuroscience, but I'm a big theology nerd. So if anyone that knows me, I kind of like getting tabs on different books, different spiritual readings. So I feel like that's kind of been a big part of my life the last 2 years, I guess.
Great story. So today we're talking about your page and your influence among the Coptic community. You have an Instagram page called Copticconcept, which has easily risen to one of my favorite, probably my favorite Coptic Orthodox page on Instagram. So my first question for you is, how'd you start it? Why'd you start it? What was the idea behind it? You know, what was kind of the inspiration for that journey?
Yeah. I think the origins of it are kind of funny. I've always been interested in looking at like old pictures, old archives, not just of the church, but of random things like fashion, sports, things of that nature. So I followed a lot of accounts on Instagram that were pretty popular. One of them I think was called Undercover Osh, posting like old archive pictures that give some sort of story. Like it will be one picture, but you can read a whole story just from that picture. So I wanted to kind of morph my account into that, but for a Coptic setting, so hence like Copticconcept, I guess. So I think that was the origins of it. And then throughout posting and coming up with some ideas, I just kind of wanted to tailor it so there's a spiritual meaning behind everything. So if you go to any of the captions of any of my posts, it's almost like an essay, I guess, of what I feel or what I'm expressing theologically and spiritually about that picture or of information, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing that you do. Like I enjoy looking through it and just reading some of your insights and some of your thoughts on certain things. So I just wanted to ask, like, you know, where was that seed planted? Like, where did you kind of get that that motivation to learn more about your faith and to delve deep? Where did that kind of stem from?
No, definitely. I had a difficult college experience. People that are closer to me, I guess they might know that a little bit. I'm not as open about talking about it a lot of the time, but I think one thing that really transformed how I thought about not just the faith, having a relationship with Christ, but also just being in the church itself, is through a mission trip that I went on my end of sophomore year of college to Uganda. I went with the church here, and it was a very important experience for me to kind of get back to the roots of my faith, understanding like why we say we're Coptic Orthodox, we say we're Christian. What does that really mean? What does that entail? And that was a question I struggled with not only during the trip, but after the trip, where I really questioned really everything in my faith. And then I kind of did a full circle back to being, you know, fully Orthodox again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, I feel like I do a lot of these podcasts, obviously, and the common theme I get for college youth who make that change, or high school youth who make that change, is it's always a mission trip.
Yeah,
it's always, you know, going and seeing people who have next to nothing and how they, you know, live their life and how they're thankful to God and how, like, in their brokenness, in their weakness, in their nothingness, their God is everything.
Definitely, I think. You know, people say it's cliche, like, oh, I went on this mission trip, I changed my life. A lot of people, we joke about stuff like that. But when you really look at the roots of what you learn during trips like that, you realize what we take for granted a lot of the time. In my own life in general, we have technology. We have all these things. And not to say that they don't have technology. They have technology in Uganda. But the way that we kind of look at technology and social media and things where we can edify ourselves spiritually, I think some of the time, like me personally, I didn't take advantage of that. I met two kids there. I still remember. One of them, his name was Promise. He was like a small baby. His brother was just carrying him around on the shoulder. And I sat down and had a conversation with them when we were stopping at the island that they were living in off Uganda. And one thing that really stood out to me when he was talking to me is saying, there's not a single day where I go without reading my Bible. And then I really sat down with myself and I was like, yes, we go to church. Yes, we do. We take communion. We do all these things. I just kind of went through the motions. For him, when he picked up his Bible and he read from the Bible, this is not just a routine that he's doing, but he was actively applying the Word of God to his life. He told me everything that he's doing in his own life is sourced from what he's reading. And it's some kid in Uganda on an island who's telling me this when I have all this spiritual nourishment around me and I decided not to take use of any of it. So it just really has you reassess what you've done in your own life and how much, it says in scripture, right? To whom much is given, much is required. So if we're given all of this and we don't take use of it, not only is what God going to think about it, but in our own lives, what are we doing really at the end of the day? Are we taking advantage of what's given to us? So.
Yeah, it reminds me of the parable of the talents where like each person is given a certain amount of talents, and with those talents, you're supposed to produce more, create a production out of it. And I think that a lot of times in our own lives, we become spiritually complacent.
Yeah.
And we just kind of sit back and we're like, no, like we'll get to it one day or we'll do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
And tomorrow never comes.
Yeah, no.
I remember one time we were having a youth meeting and we're talking about what are the common tricks that the devil tries to use against us to trick us. And the main theme we came up with was tomorrow.
Yeah.
Saying that it'll come one day. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll read the Bible tomorrow. I'll start doing this tomorrow. And instead of taking ownership and taking responsibility and going out and making that change. Yeah. Like you said, for this kid, reading the Bible was purposeful. Every single morning when he woke up and he read the Bible, there was a reason why he did it. It wasn't just, through the motions or complacency. So I think that's really important, especially with the spiritual formation of, high school and college youth. So outside of that moment, how did you kind of take that realization and start to apply it to your own life? And what is some advice you would give to people who are kind of in that crossroads and don't know really what to do?
No, that's a good question. I think for my own individual experience, after going to Uganda and experiencing this, if you ask people, I also tell them this a little bit as well. I had a religious crisis, if that makes sense. I'm not saying I was questioning Christianity, but I was definitely questioning at least orthodoxy. Why are we orthodox? Why are we doing what we're doing? Where does our faith in Christ come from? So I almost went through every denomination at that time, assessing what they believe, what they truly think about, not just only Christ, but the concept of there being a church. All these different things that we kind of just have in orthodoxy, right? And through studying each of the independent denominations, watching debates, reading books, I came back to the understanding that because of the sacraments, because of these spiritual tools that God has given us through the Orthodox Church, that I feel that, and I know that this is the true church, and that this is the church that was instituted by Christ, that was taught by the apostles, and that was kept by the fathers today. So that's kind of the process I had in deciphering that. And I think the youth, my advice, I guess, I'm still a youth, so I don't know if this is good advice or not, but I'd say one big thing is, and Abuna Gabriel and Abuna Anthony Morad from Coptic Answers, they always say, like, you need to know your faith at all times. And when you get questioned and things like this happen, how do you combat these questions is by reading the fathers. Not just saying, Saint Pahomio said this. You actually read what the fathers wrote about the Eucharist, about church itself, about Christ, who Christ was. And you have a greater appreciation for all the saints in our church, how wonderful it is to have all these saints, and then taking those sayings and taking those teachings and really applying it in your life. So that means going to church, not just sitting there and going to church. You're understanding the parts of the liturgy, what's going on. I think that gives you a greater spiritual benefit of what you're doing. Sorry for the long answer, but I'd say that's...
No, it's great.
Yeah.
And like you said, the understanding, like what Boone Anthony Ward always says, like, know your faith.
Yeah.
I think it's like, know your faith, live your faith, and teach your faith, something like that.
Yeah.
And that's such a powerful saying, especially in today's current day and age where we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but about, like the attack on Christianity from a Western mindset.
Definitely.
So moving into a little bit more into your content and about what you do on your page, how would you say that you kind of portray orthodoxy? What is your goal? Like, why do you choose to say the things or post the things that you post?
I get what you mean. And again, I always preface this. I'll try to preface this now. Like, my account itself is a blog. It's what I like to talk about. But I always believe that what I post there and what I leave in the comments and what I write in captions is going back to what the fathers taught in the church. And I've heard from people, I've had conversations with people, we always joke about it. I guess I would take the more extreme approach. I would take the more orthodox approach. But the question I always pose is, if Saint Samuel the Confessor, or if Saint Severus, or any of these saints, were they extreme in what they wrote about, or were they were they not right? If they weren't right, then why do we venerate them as saints? Why do we cherish these saints in the church? Why do we praise the saints? And for me, I think there's a lot of spiritual benefit that is found in those writings of these saints. Not just because, they defended the faith, they kept, everything orthodox, but this, if you read any of the letters of Saint Severus, for example, the spiritual, the literary devices he uses, it's poetic, it's beautiful. And I think, God willing, our church will take more advantage and learn and read from these saints of our church. So not only that we just say, this is a saint in our church, but we read them and we understand them. And I think those saints aren't read as much, I'd say, compared to maybe some of the other saints in our church. So I don't know if that fully answered what you were asking, but.
Yeah. The only point I think I would not 100% agree on is saying that the Orthodox way is the extreme way.
Yeah, no, exactly. I don't like putting it like that, but when people say it's extreme, it's not. The Orthodox itself, orthopraxis, this is the correct faith. This is the true faith. So if we're just believing what the saints who came before us are believing, we're not doing anything extreme. We're doing what the fathers taught.
Yeah.
So,
and the reason why I say that is that you look at Christianity when it was founded, you look at the context of which it was founded in, and you find that Christianity is actually extremely liberal. It's an extremely liberating religion. It's not a lot of people like to think Christianity is conservative, old school, but in reality, it's the perfect mix between liberalism and conservatism. It's the perfect mix, especially orthodoxy, of keeping tradition and looking forward to the future. And that's why I feel like when people say orthodoxy is extreme, they don't fully understand. I'm not saying you say that, but they don't fully understand, or they're not fully indulged in the Orthodox faith. Yeah. And I think that's what pages like yours or other Coptic pages, try to portray, is that, it's not necessarily about being extreme or about being liberal or about being any of these things, but it's about finding out what the truth is.
Definitely. And I think it's about how do we glorify God at the end of the day? How are we, what we're writing, what we're preaching, what we're discussing, how is this, at the end of the day, we can say, I know this about this saint, I know about, this saint said this, blah, 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 but what's the spiritual benefit from it? Even in my own life, sometimes I'll find myself, I found this really neat quote from Saint Mina. I don't know. No, Saint Mina probably didn't have any writings that we read, but you get what I mean. And like, that's a really neat quote. I'll post the quote. A lot of people like to do that. I do that. Am I getting a spiritual benefit from that quote? Am I applying that quote to my life? So at the end of the day is, how do we apply these words of these saints to our own life? And then when we take that in the root of what it is, applying it then to how we practice the faith in the liturgy, which is really how we glorify God.
So my question to you is, how do you do that?
How do we do what? So
what you just said, yeah.
I think it's a process. Like I said, I think it's a lot about having these discussions, not only just, in your own mind and talking to God, but talking with your father of confession. And I'll be real, a lot of the time, Abuna knows this, but I wasn't the best at having a relationship with my father of confession. I didn't confess for a long time. And this is around the time where the Uganda and all this stuff kind of came. And once you build a relationship with an Abuna, or not even just an Abuna, but with multiple people who are spiritually inclined as you are, you're able to then be surrounded in a group with people that are like-minded, like you are, or you're trying to be. Thinking spiritually, applying spiritual understandings to your own life. So once you make that bubble and that circle, which should be the church, which provides this for you, and then you also participate and you help in service and whatever it may be about educating and preaching the faith, the Orthodox faith, then once you almost have this little bubble, you can't, not that you want to get out of it, but it is good to stay within that Orthodox faith that really grounds you, whether it be from Abuna, whether it be from the Sunday school servants, whether it be from the church itself. So in that way, every part of your life relates back to God and relates to the church. So it's a process, definitely. I don't have an answer for everyone. I think everyone obviously has their own life journey and how they truly get to the point where they apply everything to their life. But for me, that's how it went, I guess.
I think within our church, a lot of times, we like to separate knowledge and spiritual experience.
Yeah.
We like to separate the two things. Where I think it's or the correct way is to combine them, because we're spiritual and physical beings. So we have a spirit, we have a body, and the correct way, I think, to approach spirituality and to approach this life with God is by combining them. And on the way here, me and Adam were listening in the car to the fraction of only begotten Son. And I just wanted to read a little part of it, and we'll talk about it a little bit and talk about how it connects. So it says, "So be sorrowful, O my soul, for your sins that cause these sufferings to your compassionate Redeemer. Visualize his wound before you and hope in him when the enemy rages against you." So I feel like the excerpt for me has so much power in it, because it's talking about, literally visualizing, looking at the wounds of Christ. And then it goes on to talk about dwelling within them and let the blood of Christ cleanse us and all these things. It's a very beautiful fraction. But the point behind it is, how do we, not just oh, Christ died. No, how do we put that in front of our eyes? How do we live that out in our day-to-day lives? And I think that's where the church in its wisdom, that's where she flourishes and I think that's the thing about orthodoxy, is that it's connecting the physical and the spiritual together.
Yeah, I know. I definitely agree. And I love that you brought up the fractions, actually, because so in my degree, I finished my STEM degree, so I was just taking some religious studies classes. And for my final project for one of those classes, I basically wrote my own fraction. I was explaining to my professor, it was a literary assignment, what the Coptic Orthodox fractions are in our church, what we read. And the reason why I chose that is because I believe the fractions are that merging that you're talking about between the spiritual and then also how do you apply it in your life. And they're very theologically profound while also giving you spiritual nourishment. And I think even when we just, we have Coptic Reader, we have all these things, again, when you go back and you really sit down and you read through these fractions, they're quite beautiful prayers to God, asking for mercy, while also a lot of the time giving you that spiritual understanding of who Christ is, of who God is. And I think those who wrote it, especially one of my favorite fractions is the fraction by St. Ephraim the Syrian. There's just many different fractions that are quite spiritually nourishing and beneficial that I really enjoy because of that reasons.
Yeah, and aside from the part that they're beautifully written and the way the words connect, and it's almost like you're taking a glimpse into, you have a glimpse into the hearts of the people who wrote them. Yep. And the people who wrote these are profound saints who have spent their entire lives with Christ, and it reminds us of this is the example, this is the mind, this is the heart of the people who have finished the good race, who have fought the good fight. Yep. So how do we take on that mindset? How do we take on their minds? I think that connects back to what you were talking about earlier about how your page is about talking about these saints that maybe we don't talk about a lot.
A little bit.
And, kind of connecting with them on that personal level and on that theological and spiritual level.
Could I correct something quick, by the way? I think I said St. Ephraim the Syrian. I meant the Syrian fraction because it's attributed to different people, but just came out.
You're good.
But back to what you said about saints, one thing that I really picked up recently is trying to find information about saints, like you said, that we don't talk about. And I think it's really interesting when you go through and you find a lot of these saints. Two saints that I've particularly focused on recently, Saint Biseda. So if you know anyone that has the last name Biseda, like Bisada, the actual Coptic name is Psote, Psote, in the English translation. But just works the prayers that he wrote or that were transcribed that he said in his account of martyrdom, for example. These aren't things that are out publicly that people can read in an English translation. So thank God we have many people in the church now that are working to translate things like this, so we get that spiritual benefit, which I think is really neat.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like pages like yours or Coptic pages in general that show light to these people, that's how exposure is how you kind of extend, that's how you be that light to Christ, and that's how you push the church to do things that are more spiritually and intellectually beneficial. So I was going to ask a little bit more of a personal question, but how have you seen the work that you have done through your page? How have you seen that come to fruition? I
think when I kind of set myself a goal to read and learn more about the church, from the get-go, when I had that kind of, I would joke and say it's a revival, but in my own life, really going back into the faith and understanding things, I would try to read more spiritual books, get the spiritual nourishment from the church fathers, things like that. But when I started the page, I think it was in the fall, and then I started making the captions or the posts more about my reflection on, say, this verse, on this picture, on this artifact of the church. It had me not only when I not forced myself to post or made a post, I'd really take the time to really study the material, learn what this father wrote about this, and then the spiritual significance as a result of that. So I think the page itself, when I started it, I didn't expect it to be, I guess, popular in a sense. I'm not saying it's that popular, like it has a decent following, but I think the greatest benefit that I've seen from it is my own spiritual growth in reading. Because nowadays it's so hard to just sit down and read something, right? I don't think that's just me. I think that's any college student, because when we're reading for our STEM class, we're reading for our English class. I'm not saying we're just reading for the sake of reading it or for the grade, but a lot of the time that's what it is, unfortunately. So when we sit down and read something for spiritual nourishment that affects our lives, and you kind of set goals for you to read that, that is beneficial in itself. So I'm glad that the page kind of curated it. So that I would read more, I guess.
I love how you talked about how you felt like it benefits yourself more than other people. And I can relate to that on an extreme level. Like I've had the blessing and the opportunity to talk to 16 different people in the last week on this podcast, which is a lot. But, and like no one will understand. No one who's watching this, or even people who have been with me the entire time, no one can understand the amount of spiritual benefit and the amount of growth that, I've experienced in this past week. Yeah. No one will be able to understand that or experience that. And I'm the biggest beneficiary of that.
I think it's important, like I said, I think there's very spiritual benefit. There's a big spiritual benefit for myself. But also I think the community that I've kind of gotten to be a part of through that account. And we'll probably get into this a little bit later, I'm not sure, but just the concept or the group of us all being Oriental Orthodox. So not just Coptic Orthodox, but being Oriental Orthodox. I've had the blessing really to meet so many individuals from the Syriac Orthodox Church, from the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Church, from the Armenian Apostolic Orthodox Church, all these different churches that are part of our church group. I've got to learn so much about their traditions, their rites, and then collectively about how we all share the faith with one another. And it's almost like we learn from each other's traditions through the page that I really have. And the little group chats and different contacts I've made within creating that account. So not only the spiritual benefit for me, but I think all the other Oriental Orthodox groups too. I'd say a good portion of my followers are Ethiopian Orthodox. And I love when they DM me and they say, I really saw this post about St. Tekla Haymanot, or this post on your story about him, things like St. Moses the Strong. We share so much in common theologically. We have the same faith. But obviously the rites and the traditions are different. So I think it's beautiful when we come together and we learn about each other's rites and traditions and then participate in each other's services, which I still need to work on a little bit. I haven't gone to many Oriental Orthodox services, but God willing this summer I want to take advantage of that much more. So.
Yeah, you beat me to the question. I was going to talk about that.
I had to bring that up.
I was going to talk about a couple questions, but it's beautiful how we've talked about this extensively before. Yeah. About creating something that is for the Oriental Orthodox Church as a whole, something bigger than each one of us could do separately. I know we've talked about that. Yeah. We'll talk about it more obviously later. But you kind of led into my next question, which is, how have you seen, your page have an effect on? You talked a little about the other Oriental Orthodox communities, but the Coptic community. Mm-hmm. What is that like? Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about both of our experiences, but what is that like? What is the feeling you get? Yeah. I'm interested to see your insight on that. I
think there's two aspects of the account that maybe people enjoy a little bit from discussions I've had or conversations I've just had with clergy even and non-clergy that just kind of talk to me about like things that I post maybe. But I think one thing that's really cool to see is that people are starting to become more invested in apologetics, number one. Mm-hmm. The topic of apologetics, I think, is something that the church needs at this moment in time, again, to like defend the faith, but also understand what we're doing when there's so many attacks, like we said, from Western theology, things that are not in accordance with the church. But then also there's like the aesthetic, I don't want to call it the aesthetic purpose of the account, but really the culture, Coptic culture, not just Coptic culture, Coptic Orthodox culture. Mm-hmm. How shifts in vestments, in hymnology, in different things we use in the church, even like the practice of different hymns we would sing. Yeah. I'm not an expert on any of this. I post what I learned from those people who are working to restore hymns, people who are looking to restore different rites in the church, whether it be in liturgy. I think it's a blessing to really learn about the history of this through the public material that's out there available. And we start having these conversations about what is Orthodox, what do we keep in the church, and what is supposed to stay in the church, and then what also should we revive that was previously associated or what was in the liturgy in the past. So I think there's both aspects of it, like I said, the history of it, and then also the apologetics aspect. That's really engaging, I guess.
I remember there's one post you had, I think it's the first time we talked, but it was about theophany and how, correct me if I'm wrong, but the people would like jump in the Nile River. Was that what it was?
Yeah, so
yeah.
I think honestly, I think with our youth generation, this isn't known to us. But when I talk with Ammus and I talk with Tants and Tassonis and Abunas and things like that, or people like that, they're aware of this. But I think when our youth comes to know things like the traditions of our church in Egypt for theophany, or whether it be for weddings even, the rite of weddings was different. I think I discussed this a little bit on a post in the past. Just small things like that maybe fell out of tradition or that we don't do anymore that are still really interesting and neat. I think that we need to have conversations about these things. Yeah. And I think they're interesting just to learn about. Even if we don't put them back in effect, I think they're really exciting when you really read the history of and see the pictures that we can look into and see the history from.
Of course. I remember and I saw that. I was like, this is special. Mm-hmm. Like, because you don't realize that the depth and the richness. I mean, we're a church of 2,000 years. The Coptic people are 7,000 years. I mean, one of the longest lasting populations in history. So the amount, the level, the depth of the culture and the heritage, I think is just something that, can never be studied enough. And that's why I appreciate pages like yours.
No, yeah. And again, it's a lot of this, I'd say the theology or what I express about, being Orthodox, it's my view on how I've became an Orthodox Christian.
Yeah, of course.
With the history itself and the hymns and things like that, I'll always try to reference in the comments of my posts the sources of who I learned this from or who I referenced. And I think having this collaboration between learning from other people and citing other people, then that person can look at my post, read what I wrote, go to the original source of the full, whatever it be, 50-page, 40-page essay or the image description, and they'll learn more and they'll want to be engaged enough. Well, they'll go out on their own and find out more information. And I think knowledge, you can never have it. You always want to have as much knowledge about the church as you can and your faith, because if you're ever pressed on it, or if you're ever, why are you Coptic Orthodox, things like that, you want to be able to defend your faith and, even know the history behind the church as well. So, yeah.
And I'll say from my perspective of, what, like the impact that I've seen other than my own personal life, which is, I can't even put into words, but the impact I've seen on the community around me, obviously all glory goes to God, has nothing to do with me, but you just like the DMs that I get, the people that, reach out and say certain things. Like this morning I got one, or last night I got one. It was like, it was insane. I remember I was showing Adam last night, but it was something like, talking about how someone is like trying to convert someone else in the church, and they're going through tough times and stuff. I don't want to get into any details, but it was just like, you read that and you go like, there's like, what a blessing and what an honor it is, and like how unworthy am I that like God is using whatever talents that I give to make a difference in someone's life, to make an impact in someone's life.
No, definitely. I've gotten the chance, and it's a blessing really to meet so many people that have come into the church recently, not even in person, just here. I think in Massachusetts, we've had several converts over the last couple of years that honestly are more Orthodox than I am. And they really know the faith, and they appreciate the richness and the beauty in the history of the church, in the theology of the church, and in the liturgy and how we glorify and how we worship God. And I think it's a blessing to meet them in person, but also throughout DMs and conversations I've had with people through the account, I've met so many people from all over the world, which is crazy to say, that have encountered the faith and have encountered our church, which is really remarkable. To see that the faith isn't just restricted to Egypt. It's not restricted to England, Australia. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. It is really everywhere. And that's a blessing. And it's a gift that God has given to his people to reveal himself in that way.
So when you talk about, the future of the Coptic Orthodox Church, I know we're going to get a little big here, especially in America is where we live. How do you see that unfolding, and how do you see things like, your page or other Coptic content things or Orthodox content? How do you see those things play a role into that growth?
Okay. I have a little bit of a longer answer.
Perfect.
I'm not saying it's a controversial answer, but a little bit. I'd say that there's a big movement, not movement. I think there's a big movement or pages on social media that's curated towards, Coptic memes. I love Coptic memes. Like, some of them are funny. But I'd also say sometimes with Coptic memes, we have to, no, you know what I mean.
I remember seeing
in one of my comments maybe. But I think with the way, we don't want to portray the church as, being a meme fest. We don't want to portray the church as being, unserious a little bit. And I think it's good to joke around a lot of the time. I grew up watching, I don't know if anyone's familiar watching this, what stuff Coptic guys say on YouTube. Like, this is one of, like, the biggest Coptic joke videos. But I used to laugh at it when I was growing up. But I think there's this need in our church right now to take, at least definitely from the layperson perspective, is taking things more seriously. What we're teaching, what we're discussing, the topics at hand. Because no, you're good. It's fun. It's a funny concept to me
I'm just
to
thinking
say it again.
The video in the comment.
Because when we take things more seriously, and I think we should take some things more seriously in terms of, like, what we believe and how we profess the faith and how we portray the faith online. We need to do that because of the way that I'd say America, at least being American Copts, people can just point at our faith and question it and get a bad representation of what we believe and what we teach and things like that. Say they come across one video or one thing that maybe isn't aligning with the faith, or that's poking fun maybe and making jokes of ourselves. And I'm not saying it's not dangerous in a way, but I think that a lot of time you'll ever come across, like, random reels on Instagram or posts, and it'll be a Coptic priest or a Coptic something, and the entire comment section will just be attacking Abuna, attacking the faith.
I know another video you're talking about.
How do we come together and how do we defend it and educate people about what we truly believe? Because if one person's experience with our church is negative, and not to say that the church should just be a positive, everyone should just come and be, it's not the church is really for the people need to work towards creating the church and making the church a livable church, if that makes sense. But the church should not succumb to the worldly limitations just to appease people in the church, if that makes sense. So then again, how do we defend it in that way? But also, how do we educate people so that they're not put off about different things in the church? I don't know if that really relates to what I was saying about the joking and the memes and stuff, but for me, I think there has to be a clear reverence for the liturgy and what we truly believe in every minute of the liturgy. Every minute of the liturgy matters, regardless if you're in the altar, if you're outside of the altar. You know what I'm referencing a little bit. But that's what I would say.
The one in the altar is hilarious. But
it's too much.
Here's where I think here's a different perspective. I'll play devil's advocate.
No, that's
a little
good.
bit.
Yeah, we need that.
But here's the thing: is I think if you look at the Coptic Church, let's go back 20 years.
Yeah,
we're in the year 2000-ish. And the demographic of the youth in the church are people who feel very disconnected from what the church has to offer.
I understand.
They feel like the church is too serious. They feel like the church is too old school. Church is too Egyptian. And this is an outlet for them to make the faith more relatable to them.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean.
Now, I agree with you that there needs to be a reverence and there needs to be like a setting apart. But I also understand the perspective that sometimes jokes are good. Sometimes I'm gonna get killed for this, but sometimes sometimes having that sense of humor is positive. Now, I think the line is crossed is when it's purposefully done for the sake of creating something that will make fun of someone else. For example, the video that you're referencing of in the altar, that is just a different level, right? If something happens, that's just funny. Yeah. I don't want to say anything specific because I don't want to offend anyone.
No, I get what you mean.
But if something happens that's just funny, I think that there's a way to appreciate that in a certain way. There's a way to be oh, that's whatever.
I agree.
But to manufacture something, I think that's where the line is crossed.
For my own, I'm going to give an honest what happened to me in middle school. So one time in middle school, this is related to this. There was a kid who was doing Let Those Who Read in the middle of the liturgy. And he like had a voice crack or whatever. I thought like everyone was laughing, like the middle school and like early high school kids, like freshmen, sophomores, I think. We're all joking about it. And I actually sent it. This is when I was in middle school. This is why I feel strongly about it now that I feel like I don't want to joke anymore really about things like this. Because I remember I sent it to Coptic Memes, like the original Coptic Memes page. He reposted it. And I'll never forget, I actually, like after sending it and doing that in, I think it was 8th grade, I felt so bad that not only I portrayed the church in that way, but that I put someone who was, participating in the liturgy, exposed what they did, if that makes sense. And I really regret doing that. And I think it was a big mistake on my end. And then again, I was, middle school, I think like early high school. I think it was 8th grade or freshman year. I don't really recall. But I made a big mistake sending that and them posting it and getting thousands of views. And it portrayed our church in the wrong way, saying, oh, it's like kind of a joke. And I think jokes are fine to a degree, but during the liturgy, I think there should not be things like that. And also the fact that I put someone who's a fellow Copt, a Christian, Orthodox Christian, exposed them in that way, made fun of them on a huge scale. And I really regret doing that. This was a while ago, and I really hope that person forgives me for doing that. And I think that's one of the reasons maybe why I'm more strict when it comes to joking. But if anyone knows me, I'm a jokester. Like I make jokes. Not about the liturgy, though. That will never happen. So.
Yeah, I think, there's obviously a balance. I don't think it's, because you want to allow people to feel like the church is their home.
Yeah.
Church is their hospital, you know? Should it be taken with reverence and seriousness? Of course. But I think there's also time for everything.
Exactly. That's the whole thing. And again, like your point about going back 20 years, needing that reverence, or not be, people being put off, I guess, by the church. I'll be honest, if you look at me and if you hear me talk right now, I wouldn't say I'm the most Egyptian person. I'd say I'm Coptic Orthodox because like I follow the faith. Yeah. That's what makes me Coptic, not just the ethnicity.
You're right, of course.
So for me, for me myself, like I think the culture now, we're getting to a point I think in the American diaspora, you can probably speak to this more because being from Atlanta or being at least considered part of the Southern Diocese, you guys have American Coptic churches. There's different views on that, but I think those churches are doing a great job in terms of evangelizing the faith. I think taking methods to reveal the faith, like I said, in these new outlets like Instagram. I think Abuna Arsenios, I don't know if you follow him on, a fantastic job of posting about the faith on Instagram and on YouTube and things like that. And we need more of this. I think it's great to use these tools. And I think he uses it for the correct purposes. That's why I enjoy it. There has to be that understanding of, yes, we need to use as much of these social media tools to evangelize the faith, to show the faith to others that maybe don't know about it. This is a huge blessing and gift that we can do right now. But again, holding off on certain things that we're posting that maybe are, would put someone off. I think, honestly, putting a joke, especially with the way people view the Orthodox Church, like other churches viewing us, we already have like a rep that I'd say is misrepresented a lot of the time, not only in faith, but in culture and all this stuff. Making sure that we're careful. That's all all the advice I give is always being careful about that. And that's just my thoughts on it, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective. You're definitely one of the few people that I know that have that perspective, and I understand where it comes from. And I think it's a good perspective to have. Yeah.
It's a tough conversation.
That's a good one.
People would probably ask me and be like, are you putting out, when I'm posting about saints, for example, outside the church, like the controversial stuff I'd say I post about like the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church. Like I made a post on that. What defines that a little bit ago. People are saying, oh, are you putting out a view that's not the correct view, or that maybe is putting off people? And I would say, like, I don't think that should put off anyone because, other churches, they adhere to the same thing for themselves. So just to, I guess, put that out there because I feel like maybe sometimes people would view the stuff I post as saying it's like an individual,
I think at the end of the day, it's he who has an ear to hear, let him hear,
Yeah.
So there's some people who, no matter what you say, it could be very, very simple, very right. And they just don't want to listen. That's a different story, I think.
Yeah. And I think myself included, I need to be more open-minded, hearing perspectives from different people. And I think we can't really get anywhere without having these conversations.
Of course.
Being Orthodox, you need to be steadfast in the faith, but it doesn't mean that you're closed-minded and that you don't hear other perspectives and that, you need to hear these perspectives. You can hear them, And then it's about how you respond. Because it's not, you just hear it and, mafish mushkila, like this is okay. You hear it and you always have in the back of your mind, like you have the alarm bells going off if something is like, wrong or if it's good.
I think it's hard to balance, especially with people who have to deal with, especially like in today's culture, people have to deal with attacks on their faith at such a young age or at a spiritually immature state, or from a knowledge perspective, not knowing better. And so I think that having those alarm, bells ringing is harder to instill into them. Yeah.
I think the best way to do it, though, honestly, again, this personal individual experience, but those, like Abuna Arsenios, great videos about things like this. There's very good books out there that portray the church, or they stand firm in these viewpoints.
So here's what I'll say, is obviously Abuna Arsenios is doing a great job, and these books are great. But how do you make this stuff digestible for middle schoolers?
That's the thing. And this is I had the conversation with Abunas about this too. It's a very difficult thing. I'd say, in terms of theology, always adding in, whether it be very small tidbits in a Sunday school lesson. And I think, let me rephrase this. I think from the get-go, I think a lot of time we underestimate the capabilities or the understanding that kids have at a young age in the church.
Of course, but I think we underestimate their ability to understand things, but we don't underestimate their inability to talk about it. Like, it's one thing to understand it; it's another thing to be able to stand firm and to not be swayed by it.
I think that makes sense. I think the way to do it really is through the mediums like TikTok, Instagram. When you put the information out there through these channels that make videos that are engaging. The kids will watch these videos and they're like, oh, that's in the scripture, or if that's in the Bible, that's in the liturgy. They go back to the liturgy and start reading about it. And I've seen this mostly with some of the high school youth here in Massachusetts. I'd say it's not as, I'm not saying like, oh, every high schooler is, engaged and middle schoolers engaged in my Sunday school class, for example. But when you see, because this generation, how it works, I'm acting like a mom or like this generation, but this new generation, they do, and even ourselves, because we're still part of it, we consume media through TikTok, through Instagram, through Facebook, through Twitter, whatever it is. So when we make the content digestible through these mediums, I think it's a positive way. And I'll add one just last thing about that. So there's he's actually a Protestant YouTuber. I know I'm referencing a Protestant YouTuber on this, but his name's Redeemed Zoomer. He's pretty popular. He's I think 400,000. So I submitted a video, because he did a larger video, 1 minute denomination explanations.
Yeah, I've seen this. Yeah.
And I sent him my video, and it actually is in his YouTube video now. And high school kids came up to me from church, which is hilarious. And they're like, was that your voice on Redeem? And I think when we put this media through YouTube ways like that, like Redeem or just submitting videos to be brought on bigger channels, it's digestible content that also teaches them in the capacity that they can understand. So just things like that I think are important to start doing. TikTok videos, whether it be Instagram Reels. Kids watch this stuff. If they can watch, those TikTok videos where it's like half the screen is like the subway surfers and the other half is the podcast. If they can consume that media in 7th grade, 6th grade, I think they could consume some Coptic Orthodox content on a TikTok or on a podcast form on those mediums. So that's just my views on it.
You give a lot of ideas. That's
I guess. Sure. I need to start putting them into practice, but this summer, God willing.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
That's all I have for you.
Yeah.
You have anything else you want to say?
Not really. I would just say
actually, I have one more question.
Okay,
sorry.
yeah.
What do you see the future of your page specifically, or the legacy that you want to leave? What is that kind of, when I ask that question, what comes to mind?
Yeah. So I think I definitely love taking the apologetics approach and also discussing Coptic culture a lot, Coptic Orthodox culture. But I think one thing that I definitely want to stick with and continue doing is working with pages. So I want to plug some pages right now, Oriental Orthodox creators that are doing a great job at this. So United in Christ, or the United
I'll put
Christ.
Them all on
Yep, Syriac Orthodox channel. She's doing a great job expressing the faith, making these short kind of videos. Orthodox Beard on TikTok and on YouTube, doing a great job, again, expressing the faith, defending the faith, showing the culture. And then Subdeacon Daniel Kakish, he's from California. He's a Syriac Orthodox subdeacon. He's done great apologetics work. His YouTube channel is The Lion's Den, And if you go to my Instagram and to my YouTube in the bio, his YouTube is linked on my YouTube. So The Lion's Den on YouTube, he's done a whole series defending the faith. And he also loves discussing Syriac Orthodox culture and history, which is really neat. So I think working with these kind of channels and then getting to the point where I'm able to post some videos on my own channel, which I've done a little bit to an extent, but responding to claims that are maybe false about our church. There's a lot of Catholic and Eastern Orthodox channels that have made videos about us, maybe misrepresenting what we believe and what we teach. So I'd really love to get invested in posting things like that. And I just forgot one more. Armenian Orthodox Nation, he's on all platforms, on YouTube, on Instagram. He does a great job expressing the Armenian Orthodox right as well. So that's my hope, is that we all come to understanding, defend each of our rights because we're all part of the same church, and that people have a greater appreciation for our Oriental Orthodox Church as a whole. So that's just my last 2 cents, I guess.
So that sounds good. All of those links will be in the description, including Gabe's page.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more.
No, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. And I'm glad that you've done this, because I think it's good to get different perspectives from different states in America. So,
well, thank you, Gabe, for coming on the podcast. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications, and see you guys next week. Thank you.
We'll see you guys.